My name is Brett Heidemann. I'm a business advisor here in San Francisco. Welcome to the inventory module webinar today. Today, we have quite a lot to cover. We're going to begin by explaining how to set up your warehouses and all of your internal locations and how that information gets displayed on the main dashboard. Secondly, we're going to spend quite a lot of time talking about products and all of the many fields and features you'll be able to edit and work with as you build your inventory. Third, we will talk about the two main ways to bring in your initial quantities of stock. There's going to be a manual one-at-a-time approach and a full inventory adjustment for quick updating. After that, we will work our way through all the major daily operations in a warehouse. We'll bring in receipts of products from purchase orders, we'll send out shipments of products as deliveries based on sale orders, and we'll handle drop shipping from vendors directly to customers. We'll also move our inventory internally, and we'll show how products can be pushed or pulled through your internal locations with automation by setting up different routes. After we understand all of the basic operations, we'll build on top of that and demonstrate the difference between setting up items to be made to order and compare that with making products in order to meet a certain minimum stock level through reordering rules, essentially. Last but not least, we'll discuss the different ways that barcodes can be used in Odoo to save you time and speed up all of your operations. So let's go ahead and get started with this demo database right here. So in an actual working Odoo database, you'll be able to have different users and control all of their access rights to edit exactly what they have access to view and what they don't have access to. But I want to point out that for this webinar demonstration, we're going to be running everything through as this user, which is an administrator user. So I'll have full access to everything, all of the functions, all editing and access rights. So let's go ahead and dive straight into the inventory module from the main dashboard and open that up right here. And so I want to start by talking about warehouses and locations. That's step one here. So by default, Odoo has the dashboard set up as these operations representing one warehouse. So we have receipts for your primary warehouse. We have outbound deliveries for your primary warehouse, any internal transfers going on for that warehouse, and also a quick link to dropshipping over here. But in configuration settings, you can set up all of your different warehouses from here by adding more. So we have a warehouse here, of course, but we can add an additional warehouse, let's say, if you have one. And let's just say that this is warehouse number 2. And from here, you can give it a short name designation, which will pop up on all forms related to it. There's additional settings here, but we'll get into that later. You can, of course, specify the address where that warehouse is located, which is pretty critical. If it's overseas or in just down the road, you can specify that. As soon as I add that additional warehouse, it changes the overall interface here on the main dashboard of inventory. Whereas before we had the receipts and internal transfers and deliveries for the old company, we now have the same for your secondary warehouse over here. In addition to that, more granularly, we can set up locations. So I can go to locations here and add more internal locations within your warehouse. So I could say refrigerator, for example. And I'm going to specify that that belongs to my main warehouse, which is designated WH, and overall in the stock area. So there's a parent-child relationship between locations and other locations within an overall warehouse. So you can be as fine-tuned and as granular with it as you want. Every individual location, you can specify the type that it is, and there are different rules associated with each. So it could be an internal location, it could be a customer location, vendor, or a virtual location too. Various types here, depending on what it is. You can assign it to a particular person that would be in charge of that location. You can specify whether it's a scrap location, if it is some products that need to be scrapped and you want to designate an area where those go. It could be a return location for your return items. And we can also more fine-tune it by specifying the localization information. By default, corridor, shelves, height, for example, although you can use these however you need to. Furthermore, we can also specify a location barcode, and more on that later. We'll talk about how you can use a barcode to represent the location itself, which will really help you in your transfers. Finally, I want to point out that the location has smart button links up here to show you what the current stock of items is for that specific location and any overall products that are associated with it. More on locations later as we start working with our operations. So warehouses and locations are handled that way. And moving on, I want to go and spend a lot of time talking about the actual product. So to do that, we're going to go to inventory control. We're going to click on products here. And we have our list of products listed this way. There's two main views. You can view it in an icon-based format, or you can view it in list format by clicking over here. Depending on what you're trying to do, you might find one to be more user-friendly or more effective. But from the icon view, you get a very quick view of seeing the name of it, the SKU number or internal reference of it, the sell price, and the quantity you currently have on hand, as well as just a convenient photo or image right there. List view has a little bit more information. It allows you to sort using any of these fields here, sort by price, for example. Either of these options allow you to use our powerful filtering or grouping and favorite tools, and I'll demonstrate that real quick. If you have 10,000 different products in your inventory, for example, you'll probably want a very quick way of being able to find it. For one thing, of course, you could just do a quick search. If I want to do a search on chemical, it'll reference anything with the name chemical in it immediately, of course. But if it's more specific, you'll see that you can use the filtering tools to zero in on anything in your inventory based on any of the data fields in there. So if you want to, you can filter it down to products where the cost, for example, is greater than $3 or something like that. And it'll immediately apply a filter that narrows it down that way. Whether you're in icon view or in list view, it's the same thing. The grouping tools are also very powerful because the grouping tools allow you to sort things together. If I want to, for example, I can group everything in this view by the product category. And if I apply that, it immediately transfers it into a column-based view, as you can see here, by the category. Or in list view, it does sort of a drill down view where you can open up the categories like this. And of course, you can group by other things within that if you want and continue to drill down. One advantage of using what we call the Kanban or icon kind of view here is that you can very quickly make changes to things and do it this way because it's drag and drop. So for example, we have this product here is a packing materials category. This product here is a chemical, but these things don't have a category associated with them yet. If I want to very quickly make a change to them, I can drag it over to this category and it'll immediately change this product so that it is now with that category. As we dive into the products themselves, you'll see how that takes effect. So there are advantages to this. And then finally, if this is a view that you want to make use of pretty commonly, you might want to save it as a favorite like I've done here. And that way, if you're going into your products from the main dashboard, you can just very quickly pull that up and it will bring that up with every time without having to actually build it or set up the filters. So yeah, that's the view of the products from a list view. But let's actually dive into the products and start working with them. So if I open up this one, for example, this is called the product form view, and this is where you can control all of the information for the product itself. It's split into different tabs. The general information tab has the most common and basic information. I'm going to go ahead and hit edit here so we can start making some changes. If I hit edit on this product, first off, you can control, of course, the name of it, but you can control whether it's a sellable product or whether it's something that you can buy or both. You can specify the product type. Most things are going to be stockable with inventory operations because it keeps track of how much you have on hand in actual quantities. But if it's something where you don't track actual quantities, something, for example, screws or nails or something like that, you might make it consumable, which is very similar, except it takes away the option to actually track stock quantities. We also use inventory products to track services, which is, if you're actually putting a service item like consulting or labor or something like that on a quote or invoice, you could do that and treat it like a product as well. Most of the things we're going to be dealing with are going to be stockable, and that is what it actually defaults to. Internal reference is what Odoo uses to refer to what you might be more familiar with as a SKU or an item code or a part number. Regardless of what you're calling it, Odoo calls it an internal reference, and I'll show you later how, if you want, you can customize that. But the way it shows up in most forms in Odoo is, for example, up here at the top, it has the item code in brackets, followed by the product name. If I'm viewing it on this page, it does the same thing, item code and product name. The internal reference allows you to very quickly search for it based on that as well. So in addition to searching on the name, it narrows it down that way. You can also search for the internal reference. So 126, it narrows it down as well. Moving on, other things that you can control, barcodes. We have full barcode compatibility. We'll talk a lot more about barcodes later down the line, but if I enter in my own barcode, I can make one up and print a barcode label at any time for the product, as you can see here. Barcode shows up as such with the item code, the name. This is customizable as well. But we'll talk more about barcodes and how they function towards the end of the presentation. We have a field for the HS code relevant for shipping. You can choose the category, that's what we were talking about earlier, and that's why I was saying you can either customize it here internally, or if I want to, you can make the change in that group view before on the list view. You can specify the overall sale price, you can specify the overall cost. I should point out that this is just the basic level, the public price and the public or default cost, but these values here can be affected by using price lists, both sale price lists or vendor price lists. And the cost can be more complicated as well because you can factor in landed costs over time with perpetual evaluation. That is a subject for a different webinar. We have a webinar all about landed cost calculation and whatnot, and price lists are discussed in our sales webinar. So if you're interested in those topics, you should definitely check out those webinars. Every product, if you want to, you can specify that you work with it and sell it in one unit of measure, but you can, if you want to, purchase it in a different unit of measure. So that allows you to set up conversion rates. For example, if it's something that you buy by the gallon, but you sell it by the ounce, something like that. You have the option to do that, and all of your different units of measure and the conversions between them are controlled here in settings. You can set up your units of measure. You can also decide whether you are controlling your purchase bills based on ordered quantities or received quantities. That's more of a subject for the purchasing module, so you can definitely look into that to find out how that affects the purchasing, but it is controlled on the product level. On the inventory tab, we specify the routes that we go about obtaining this item. So you can buy it from a vendor, in which case you'd normally want to specify a vendor. So in this case, since it's buy, I'm going to add a vendor real quick. I'm going to say that we buy this from our chemical supplier, for example. And when I build the vendor, you can specify the information, like, for example, the vendor might have their own name for this product. So they may call it the Act Pro container, something like that. And they might have their own part number or item code for it. So I can specify that as well, CAM 1000, for example. You can also, on this pop-up, you can specify how long it takes to receive from the vendor, which is pretty critical because it's going to factor into knowing when a receipt shipment is late or not. And also for your planning. Over here, if you need to, you can specify a minimal quantity. So for example, if the vendor requires you to buy them 10 at a time minimum, you can specify that here. And here you can specify the specific cost that this product is for this vendor. So if you want to, even if your overall product cost is listed as for this vendor, you might have a different price on it, and you can specify that here. You can have as many vendors as you need to, of course, but that you'll always default to the one at the top, or you can set up different rules for which vendors to prefer. So your vendor information is specified here. You can also specify packaging type. We'll comment on that a little bit more, but you can set up a default package for the product here that it will always incorporate when you're doing an outbound delivery. Over here, if you want to, you can specify drop shipping or make to order, but we'll talk about that a bit more when we get into the actual operations. Over here, if you want to, you can decide whether this is something that you track by unique serial number. If you do track by unique serial number, you can also specify expiration date and rules about the removal time, use time, lifetime. That usually pertains more to food industry products, of course. It can either be a unique individual serial number, so every individual item of this product will have its own number, or you can do lots, so whole batches of products will be identified by one number. For the serial number, for example, I can show you later on how we actually log that. Or you could just say that there's no tracking of serial numbers or lot numbers at all for this product. So we can control that there. The sales tab is going to specify relevant information in terms of how you're actually selling this product. So if you're doing an e-commerce platform, for example, and you're using the Odoo website builder to sell your products online, you can specify specific website categories that it'll show up on. You can also specify alternative products, so suggested products that pop up underneath it, or accessory products that pop up as potential add-ons when you're checking out. That's more of a discussion for the e-commerce webinar, but I will show you very briefly that up here you have a link to an e-commerce page for it. You can always click on that for the product and take a look at the web page that would get generated from it, and they do interact directly. By default, it is unpublished, meaning that the public can't actually view it, but at any time you can publish it, they can pay for it, and it'll communicate directly on the back end for it. But like I said, that is more of a discussion for e-commerce, so I'm going to move back to inventory. So that's the sales tab. Similarly, we have a point of sale section over here. You can specify whether or not a product can be sold at the point of sale terminal if you're using a brick and mortar face-to-face payment interface. And also, if it is say a produce item or something like that, you can make it so that it will allow you to weigh it with a scale to factor in the costs. And that is useful if you're specifying the weight information and volume and things like that. That is an option. You can also specify a warranty and customer lead time and how long they can expect to get it once they've ordered it. And we can also talk about variants. Variants are an option that might pertain to you if you are offering, mostly through e-commerce, various checkout options that you can select for the product. I'll demonstrate by making a new product real quick. I'll say I'm going to create a new product called plastic box, let's just say. And of course, if you want to over here, you can specify the image. I believe I have a box image ready to go. If I go over here, inventory webinar, there we go. Here's an image. Yes, plastic box. Okay, great. So I made a new box product real quick. But let's say that there's a few different options for this box. The basic price is $5, let's say. But I want to make it so that when a customer is buying this, they can choose a few different options. So you can group them all over here. You specify an overall attribute, which is sort of the option category. We'd say attribute and we'd say size, for example. And within that, we have a couple of different options. I'll say size small, size large. I already pre-configured some of these, but you can add more. If you want to, you could say medium, for example, and make that a new option for it. And I'll save that. When I did that, what happens is you keep one overall product called plastic box, but you've created 3 new different variants for it. And I can view them all here, and each one of them, I actually have the ability to customize and make changes to the individual variant itself. For example, it can have its own specific internal reference or SKU number. It can have its own barcode, its own volume, its own weight. And that's especially useful if you are messing with sizes. Chances are it would have its own volume, it would have its own weight. But it's controlled together like this, and part of the advantage there is that if you're looking at it on the website, for example, and the customer is checking out, they can just go to the page for the plastic box and then select the option here, and so on and so forth, and it communicates in the back end. Yeah, and it's a very quick way of doing it too, because I just made those really quick. But if there's many different options, so in addition to size, you could also say color. And let's say you could do red, you could do white, you could do black, and save that. Immediately, it multiplies it and does every possible combination, red, small, black, small, so on and so forth. You might choose that some variants don't actually exist, so you might remove those after the fact. Maybe that's not actually an option to get the particular configuration, for example. And then you can also choose the variant prices too. So every individual variant, if I want to, let's just say that anything that's large has an additional fee. We could say that anything that's large is $5 extra. And if I save that, the way that it shows up on, for example, the website is that if you select large, it would be $5 more, and so on and so forth. Now, this is a very basic interface for it, and there's no customization going on. We haven't edited it. It doesn't have to look exactly like that. It can definitely be a lot more appealing and attractive to the customer. So keep that in mind. This is just the basics of it. For more about that, definitely check out the e-commerce or website webinar. But moving on, invoicing, just very briefly, for the product, you can control the policy. So whether you're able to invoice this product to a customer based on what they've initially ordered, or whether you're able to invoice it based on the actual delivered amount. You can specify that. Every company has different policies, and as you see, you can control that on the product level. Tax information, you can have different default taxes for the customers and different default taxes for the vendors for this product. And then finally, notes, you can control the descriptions that will appear on quotations for this product, or you could have a different description that appears on the purchase order, your outbound deliveries for your warehouse workers, internal transfers, and incoming receipts. This is where you control all of those messages that pop up for that product. And so that's the static information as I would describe it through these tabs. Additionally, though, you have links up here that we've already kind of touched on a little bit. These links up here are for more links to different information that relates to it. So for example, if it's something that you manufacture yourself and don't buy, you can then create a bill of materials and you can link to that bill of materials up here. That's more of a discussion for the manufacturing webinar, but the information is up here. You can see a link to any past manufacturing orders for this product. You can see a link to any procurements and procurement requests for this product, any purchase orders, any sale orders, and then more. You can always view the quantity you have on hand for the product. You can always see what you're expected to have in the forecasted. You can look at all stock moves for the product, and we can set up reordering rules and routes, which we'll talk about in greater detail later on. So you have quick links to all of these things here. This is information that will change in real time as you get more sale orders. You'll always be able to click on it and take a look at the list of sale orders for this product itself specifically. So that's products. That's it's a big discussion, but there's a lot you could do with products, of course. So moving on, the next step for this webinar that I wanted to go over with you is setting your initial stock levels. So as you can see here, we have 29 on hand of this, we have 1 on hand of this, and so on and so forth from this view. And then initially, you can also, of course, see it right here. When you're initially building your inventory, for example, that plastic box that I created, when you're initially setting it up, you have a couple of options for adding the inventory quantities. For one thing, you can click right here, update quantity on hand, and just real manually say, we have 10 of these on hand, and apply it, and that's it. If it's something that you track by serial number, by specific serial number or lot number, for example, I believe that chemical product that we have, converter chemical, it is tracked by unique serial number. So when you update the quantity on hand, in addition to saying we have 1 of these on hand, you also probably want to specify a serial number and apply that. So that's the very basic way to do it. Obviously, you don't want to do that for all of your single items of inventory. The other way you could do it, a much faster way, is to do an inventory adjustment and run an inventory adjustment for everything. You can either import it as a spreadsheet file, a CSV file, or just create a new one. And let's just say initial inventory. And I'm going to go ahead and specify that I want it to pertain to all products. As you can see, you could do it on just a particular category of products or one product, or do it based on serial numbers or packs. You have all these options, but I'm going to do it on all the products for all of my stock too, instead of just a specific location. I'm also going to specify include exhausted products, which will also include things that have a 0 value for now. I'm going to go ahead and start it. So now that I've started it, it basically lists out every single item and also every variant here that you have here. It's going to already show you a theoretical quantity that it thinks you have in your stock. As you can see, we have some zeros and we have some quantities here. If you want to, from here, this page, you can set the quantities to 0, the real quantities to 0, and start from scratch. And this is useful if you have to do a manual update of inventory, a couple times a year, for example. And then from this screen, you have the ability to very quickly go in and make changes. You could say, okay, there's actually 25 of that item. There's actually 4 of this. Based on what we're seeing here, and make these updates, not only just on the quantities though, you can also make the changes here, for example, to the serial number. Maybe this is a typo before, you can go in and actually make a correction on this screen, kind of like a spreadsheet basically that you're viewing for. Or if you want to go ahead and put this in a pack or a package, you can do that from this screen as well. Change the units, you can change all of these fields here from this screen. Then basically, once you're done with it, you can go ahead and validate, and it will in real time affect all of the quantities that you have on your inventory. So that's the fast way of doing it. Also, I should probably point out, just like you can do a data import of the quantities, You could do a data import for basically anything in Odoo. So you can do an import for all of your products themselves by just grabbing a CSV file real quick. For example, this one right here, grabbing it, and then it's just a matter of mapping it to the specific fields. That is a bit advanced, and we do have templates that we can offer to you, but generally you might need some assistance to do a data import, either by using your primary contact at Odoo, whether it's an account manager or a partner, an official affiliate of Odoo. So data import can be done, just might require a little bit of assistance because it can get complicated the more fields you have and the more parent-child relationships there are involved. But yeah, that's enough about setting the initial stock levels. Now let's move on to the overall inventory operations. So we're going to talk about receipts, deliveries, drop shipments, internal transfers, so on and so forth. So first off, let's talk about receipts. So from here, you can view all of the receipts that you have that you're expecting, ones that you have to receive. This is a shipment that we're waiting on, for example. The way that receipts are brought in typically is from the purchase module. So I'm going to go over briefly to the purchases module right here, and let's just go ahead and create a new purchase order. Now in the purchases module, and this is something you can learn more about through the purchases webinar, but you can start with an RFQ. So you're sending a request for a quotation to a vendor on an item or a series of items, or you can bypass that and go straight to an actual purchase order if it's something you already know the dollar amount for. In this case, in the interest of time, I'm just going to go ahead and create a new purchase order. And I'm going to specify that I want this from, say, the beer supplier. This is a vendor. And I'm going to go ahead and list out that I want to order 10 quantities of the Pacifico beer at, say, this price. And I'm going to go ahead and specify that I want 5 quantities of the Sierra Nevada beer. Not going to spend a lot of time talking about the purchasing, but I will go ahead and confirm it. And as soon as I confirm that purchase order, the relationship between purchasing and inventory is such that it immediately generates a shipment that you're waiting on. It's a receipt. You can view it from here in the purchases module by clicking that button right here, or I'm just going to pop up over to the inventory module, and it shows up over here. It's one that we're waiting to receive immediately. And so here is the receipt form. Now from here, from this form of looking at all of your different receipts, by default it's showing you the list view. You can also view it in an icon view, which is useful if you're using barcode operations, as we'll see later. Or, and this is extremely useful, calendar view. You can see exactly when you're expecting to receive them. And that's going to be based off of the lead time and the expected arrival date when you initially create the purchase order. But you can help schedule this, and if you need to, you can even push things out. If, for example, you're closed on one day or something like that, you can do your planning for your receipts from here. When we're looking at all of these different receipts forms here, I can select them all and I can print the picking operations. So if you're using paper documents to help run your warehouse, you can print basically receipt order forms and hand them out. This can either be done manually or on a schedule if you want, but as you can see, it has all the relevant information. So it's showing us that we are waiting on these products. We are waiting from this particular vendor, and it's going to arrive on a particular date. So you can print these forms out and have them at the ready to help you when you're doing your receipts. If I open one up, the way we handle a receipt and process it is to go ahead and either hit validate real quick. Once it actually shows up, you can hit validate and it'll just automatically bring all of your inventory into stock. It'll bring it in, the entire quantities, 10 of this and 5 of this. Or say you only receive part of it, you can hit edit and specify, okay, it's a partial shipment. We only got half of the Pacifico beer, for example, and we did get all of the Sierra Nevada. So if I do a partial shipment like that and hit validate, it's going to give me a prompt where it asks me if I want to create a back order or not. So if you create a back order, I'm going to go ahead and say yes, let's create a back order. Basically what happens is your original delivery gets completed. You can follow the steps up here when it was a draft, when it was partially available, and then when it was done. So we completed the first one of these quantities, but it immediately also creates a new delivery receipt right here. It creates a new receipt that we're waiting on, and it references it right here. It'll always link back and say this is a back order of this original receipt document. And once again, it still references the original purchase order too, which is PO0003. So it does keep you organized in that regard. And since it's clickable links, if you need to, you can always click on it and go back and view the original shipment for whatever reason. Make full use of the breadcrumbs, as we call them up here, for your navigation. You can always go back a step and see what you were looking at just to stay organized. But yeah, the relationship between the receipt and the quantities is such that if I go into my products and look at, say, these beers right here, as soon as I validated that receipt, it affected my quantity on hand and added to that. And you'll see there's a discrepancy here between the on-hand quantity and the forecasted quantity. And that's because this is what we physically currently have in our inventory, but the forecasted takes into account all of your active purchase orders and receipts that you're waiting on, and it also takes into account any sales for the product as well. So there's often going to be a difference there based on any active deliveries and receipts that you're waiting on. So that's basically receipts for you. Deliveries, so outbound deliveries to your customers, work the same way, except instead of linking to the purchases module, they link to the sales module. So I'm going to go to the sales module. Similarly to purchasing, you can either start with a quotation to a customer or bypass and go straight to a sale order. I'm just going to do straight a sale order. And let's say I'm going to create a sale order to Jim Jones, for example, some new customer, for a tractor wheel for tractor. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and sell him a one wheel and save that. I'm not going to spend that much time on the sale order itself. I'm just going to go ahead and confirm it. Now, as soon as I confirm it, it generates a delivery, just like it did with purchases. You can view it from here, or it pops up in the inventory module immediately as a delivery that needs to go out to the customer. So similarly, just like before, you can always look at your calendar and see when things are expected to be delivered out. In this case, I can open up this delivery, and from here, I can decide to go ahead and just validate it and ship it out. We also offer, I'm going to point out this, we allow you to scrap a product at any time. So if for whatever reason during the shipping process, if you break something and ruin something, you can always hit scrap, and then it'll ask you to log exactly what item you have scrapped. So if it's a bunch of items on the list for the delivery, but one thing gets damaged, you can scrap it right then and there, and you'll always have a record of what in the original delivery that scrapped product was linked to, and also you'll have a record of who scrapped it, what the reason was, and you can move it to a scrap location at that time. So, at any point in the process, you can scrap something. But in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and validate it and ship it out, and it'll go to the customer. That is a very simple form of delivery. You'll see in a second that deliveries and receipts can be more complex and have different stages involved if you want. I want to point out that from the delivery form, once it's actually been shipped out and it's done, this is where you can initiate a return on it. So for example, if a customer needs to have an RMA because they want to return a product for a refund, or it's damaged and they need to get a replacement, you can go to this original delivery form at any time and you can hit return and initiate that you want to return every item on the delivery or maybe just one item from the delivery. You can specify where to return it to and go through that process as such. And it essentially at that point turns into a receipt, but we can talk more about that in the sales and CRM webinar essentially. And so yes, you can do your returns from there. I also want to point out, let's see, here's another delivery that needs to be done. This one right here, for example, with a converter chemical. When you're specifying your deliveries, you can put your products into a package. So you can specify a particular package. Maybe, as we saw earlier, you have a default package for the product already. If not, you can put it right here and have as many different package types as you need to. So for example, you might have it go on a pallet, for example, and specify that. And the pallet can have its own weight, which factors into the shipping integrations, which we'll touch on very briefly. But yeah, you can specify the packaging here, and that can be done for a product on the product one at a time, or you can group several things together into a pack as well. So we allow for packaging options there. Additional info, this is the tab in which you can specify your shipping options. So let me make just a new delivery real quick from scratch. I'm going to send it to, say John. I'm going to specify this delivery. On this page right here, if it's not already specified in the sale order, you can specify right here your different shipper and carrier that you want to have this delivered by. Now, the shipping integrations are a separate charge. It's a separate module, and I'm not going to talk about it. That is actually a subject that is detailed enough to warrant its own webinar, so stay tuned for a shipping integrations webinar. But I will just comment very briefly that you can specify the shipper here, and then when it goes to actually ship out the product, say this chemical, for example, you have the option of sending it to the shipper from there. So, okay, in this case, I have to specify the lot number. That's actually a good demonstration. If it is something that uses lots and serial numbers, it'll prompt you to enter that serial number before you can actually validate it, which makes sense. But from here, as you can see, this is the button called Send to Shipper that is going to send all the relevant information to either UPS, FedEx, or USPS and allow you to print your labels from there. But like I said, that's a discussion for a future webinar. So that's enough about deliveries. I'm going to talk very briefly about drop shipments, because if you want to, you can enable it using this drop ship box over here to keep track of it. You can enable products to be shipped directly from your vendor to your customer and just track it from here. The way you do that is you set it up on the product level. Let's say that this thing right here, this non-stock electrical line, on this tab over here, you can specify that this is something that you drop ship. You definitely would want to specify the vendor and make sure there is a vendor associated with it, and say, we buy it for $50 or something like that. Save that and say that it's something we buy. And the way it works is that if we get a sale order for it, I'll demonstrate real quick, a new sale order on that product. Let's say I'm going to ship it to Ted Robinson. I'm going to have it be that electrical product. This is a non-stock thing. We don't stock it in our own inventory. It's dropship only. And then confirm it. What happens is, instead of generating a delivery like we're used to seeing here, what actually happens is it generated a purchase order, which makes sense. It generated a purchase order for the vendor, but it says it's going to go to that customer. If you look at it, here's the dropship address. So I confirm that order, and instead of having a purchase order that goes directly to us for a receipt, it actually does a dropship, which you can view over here, and it's going to go directly to the customer. Similarly, just like a delivery or whatnot, you can specify, the tracking or the carrier information. So either the vendor is going to use their own carrier, or if you want, maybe you can specify to the vendor to use your shipping integrator or your shipping account. You can specify that here, just like a delivery. And then when you get, the notification, either automatically or from them sending you an email that it has been properly shipped and you're tracking it, you can just validate it just for your records to know that it is complete. It has its own numbering system called DS for a dropship. But yeah, in short, that is an option with Odoo. You can allow for dropshipping and track it through the inventory module as well. Internal transfers is worthy of talking about. If you need to move your stock from one location to another, whether it's a location to another location within one warehouse, or if it's moving from one warehouse of yours to another warehouse of yours, you can handle it from internal transfers. So to do that, you can go ahead and just go in here, or actually there's two ways to do it. You can hit this button right here, or click more and click transfer. It's pretty simple. You basically just choose the source location and then choose the destination location. And then you validate it and specify what the product is that you're going to move. So I'm going to say I want to move one of these or two of these, I don't know, from this location to, and here's a list of all of my different locations. I'm going to go ahead and move it to the refrigerator and validate it. Pretty straightforward. It's kind of like a delivery form, except it's moving from one location of yours to another location. Now, I just did that manually. That's a manual internal transfer. But internal transfers also play a role in your what we call advanced routing as well. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about advanced routing for a second. And what that means is, for example, if you have a receipt, and instead of just being a one-step receipt like it defaults to, where it comes from the vendor and directly goes into your stock in one step, we allow you, if I go to warehouses, for example, and I open up my primary warehouse, my company, and hit edit, we allow you, instead of just doing one step we can also do a two-step process where first it goes to an input location and then it goes to stock. So I'm going to enable that. And then also for your outbound shipments, your deliveries, you can set it up so that it's either a two-step process where it goes to an output location first and then it ships out, or you can do a three-step process where you package it up first at a packaging location and then move it to an output location and then ship it out. So it's a three-step process. I'm going to enable that. And as soon as I enable that for this warehouse, you'll see it changes the dashboard. We now have some more boxes here. So in addition to receipts, internal transfers, and deliveries, we also have a picking step and a packing step right here. And so the way that works is it's basically handled through internal transfers. So if I do, for example, a sale order now of a product, let's say I'm going to go ahead and just sell to this customer. I'm going to sell another thing. I'm going to sell a hitch bracket assembly and save that and confirm. Now that I have a longer process in place, it doesn't create one delivery form or one stock move, it creates three. And it's all automated in a single flow, because if I go into inventory, basically it's a flow where first it's a pick step, which is essentially an internal transfer. If I open it up, there is a picking step where it's coming from the stock location, and we need to pick it and move it to the packing zone. And so this is an internal transfer that we're validating. Sure, we moved it from that step. Maybe one person is in charge of this step, for example, and then it moves on to the next step for packaging. So you can move it over here and have the packaging step. Once again, this could be one person that's in charge of this, or one team or department that's in charge of this step. They do all of your packaging, for example, validate that, and then finally move it to the final step, which is the outbound delivery itself once it's done. And you'll always have full traceability. You can always see when it was transferred from, where it came from, what the demand was, where it came from, and what the previous step was, and you can validate it. So we allow you to do more complicated operations by default with a flow in place if it requires it. So if you have a lot of operations, you can specify that. Now keep in mind, the pick, pack, and ship step that I just illustrated, you don't necessarily need to do that for all of your inventory. You could specify on the product level, for example, that this special order, this metal bolt, for example, you could specify all of the rules for it. You can specify if it's a pick, pack, ship type of operation, or if it's just a one-step type operation. And you'll also be able to apply those rules to categories as well. So if you want to, you can take a pick, pack, and ship route and apply that to an entire category of products that require that. So, we allow for advanced routing. A lot of times with routing, it can be complicated enough that we often recommend that you either contact us for advice on setting up your specific needs, or work with whatever specific Odoo affiliate or partner that you're already working with, because it can take a little bit of planning. It is advanced and it is potentially complex, but it offers a lot of opportunity for more automated workflows for you. So those are basically routes. And what a route is, like the pick, pack, and ship step that I just talked about, or that receipt in two steps that we just talked about. All this is basically a series of rules. So in this case, you can go in and you can customize these routes that I just set up and specify those three steps over here. You can specify where those locations are. Instead of by default going from to the packing step, you can create a new location that it goes to. And this is really powerful because you can make as many different routes as you need to with something very, very specific. For example, if I want to have a particular route that moves your stock of, say, cold items or items that should be refrigerated, if I want to, I can make a step that always puts those items into your refrigerator location. One way you can do that I'd recommend is you take this pre-existing receipt in two steps route that we have here and then duplicate it real quick and then call it receipt in two steps to refrigerate. Now that I have this step basically configured, you can modify it and just say that I want to push it, instead of going to the stock location, I want to move it to the refrigerator location. And then once you have that route configured, this new route, you can specify which products get it. So I would normally say that I would want any of these beer items, for example, to follow that route. Or we could do it to the entire category called beer, for example, and it'll immediately apply, if I choose that route, the refrigerator step, it'll immediately default to that for any item or product that follows that category. That's just one of the powerful things that you can do with categories. You can make effects take place on a whole bunch of products all at once. So yeah, so that's routes, and it's a more advanced topic. If you want to, you can have an individual discussion with us. We encourage you to reach out to either us or your partner for a detailed kind of discussion about how to tailor the routing options for your specific flows. So I'm going to have a brief discussion real quick about, now that we understand the basics of deliveries, receipts, and internal transfers and routes, I would like to talk about the difference between make to order and make to stock. And so for make to order, that's for things where you don't normally want to stock them. It's not a product that you need to have in your inventory sitting around. So you can make it a make to order product only if, and so that you only procure it when a customer purchases one. So an example of that, I would say, is if we want to, we can have this special order computer, this thing right here, this product. Let's say this is something that it is not worthwhile to keep it in stock in our inventory. So what you would do is you would enable that we buy it from a vendor, just like we have here, but you can do make to order and combine the two. So I can combine make to order and buy, and the effect of that is that, I'll demonstrate right now, if you have a sale order for the product, and somebody, like Alice customer, buys that computer and confirms it, it immediately triggers the creation of the deliveries, to go out, but the deliveries won't be able to, you won't be able to do it until you get it in stock. It's waiting availability. And what it also does at that time is automatically generates a purchase order at the same time. Which is good. So you can view this purchase order draft, you can send it by email to the vendor at that time and confirm it, and it'll always reference the source. It'll say this is for that particular sale order, and it's for this particular inventory transfer. So then the process is such that you complete the receipts, and let's say the vendor finally, the vendor sends you the computer product, you receive it, you bring it into your stock, apply that, and then you can go ahead and from that go through the delivery process. I'm not going to walk through all of that, but to sum it up, basically, you can set up a rule that says that whenever you get an order, a sale order for this product, it will automatically generate a purchase order to receive, and it'll set it all up for you. So it's all pretty much automated. All you have to do is send the purchase order and then follow the steps of receiving it into stock and immediately delivering it out automatically. So that's make to order. That's for things where you don't really want to keep it in stock, but you want to have it set up in place to very easily procure it as needed to fulfill orders. But if it's something that you do want to keep in stock, if it's a product that you don't really ever want to run out of, for example, like this metal bolts right here, let's say that this is such a valuable thing to have in stock that you definitely don't want to risk running out. That's where we get into reordering rules. So you wouldn't do make to order. You could still say buy, and you'd still have a vendor specified, but we would set up a reordering rule, which is over here. I'm going to set reordering rule right here. And reordering rules are really powerful in Odoo because they're simple, but they are very effective. Let's just say that I want to have a minimum of 50 quantity of this bolt in stock at any given time. I'm going to save that. Now you can do other rules too if you want to. You can have a maximum and make it so that not only does it have to not drop below this level, but it needs to bring it up to a particular level, so you have sort of a window. But I'm just going to leave it simple as minimum of 50. So the way that reordering rules work in Odoo is that it's going to see that we have 0 on hand currently. We have 0 that we're expecting to get, but we do have a minimum quantity of 50. And so by default, every 24 hours, it runs a scheduler that checks all of your different reordering rules that you have, and it will check your routes as needed to fulfill that demand and meet that. So instead of waiting 24 hours right now and waiting for a purchase order to get generated, instead, I'm going to go ahead and run the rules, run the schedulers, just manually, just to demonstrate it. So now that I ran the scheduler, it went and it identified that this product, that metal bolt, we don't have enough in hand, but we need to fulfill it at 50. So it automatically goes and looks at your route selected for it. And in this case, since it says that we need to buy it, it's going to reference this vendor, and then it automatically generates a draft purchase order, as you can see here in the purchases module. And I can take a look at it. A couple things to point out about this. By default, it is just a draft. It doesn't automatically go to the vendor yet. It's just a draft form, so you can interact with it from here. For example, even though the rule says 50, we might decide to manually override that and say, let's actually order 90. You can also add additional items to it at that time. So, it's interactive in that regard. But then the idea is that from here you confirm it, and it goes through the same process where it generates a receipt and goes in there. So the advantage is you have all your rules set up. You can just come in on a daily basis and you'll see a bunch of automatically generated draft PO forms that you can work with. And it's smart enough to know that if you have multiple items for one vendor, it'll consolidate them into one form. It's not going to overdo it and create way too many forms for you. It'll keep it simple and keep it consolidated. So that's make to order and make to stock. Finally, I'm just going to talk about barcode functionality real quick. So with barcode functionality, the 3 recommended barcode scanners that we have in place that work with Odoo inventory are the USB barcode scanner, pretty straightforward and common. And barcode scanner would be plugged via USB into a stationary computer or a laptop. It's ideal for work where all of your inventory operations, or at least barcode scanning operations, take place at a standalone terminal, and you have like a shipping station. We also do Bluetooth barcode scanners, and the advantage of this method is that you can tether it to a mobile phone, or you can tether it to a tablet, and that way you can move around the warehouse and have a little bit of interaction with Odoo on your phone or on your tablet. But the best way to do it, if you have a lot of moving around, is one of these mobile computer scanners, which you can use, which incorporates a computer built into the device, and you can run Odoo from this. Now, of course, definitely verify that your specific device that you want to work with will work with Odoo, and feel free to contact us to ask about it. But as far as inventory operations managed with a barcode module, the way you do that basically is you have this barcode module from the desktop that you can go to. And it basically allows you to do shortcuts for everything. So a few examples of things that we've already covered, but how to do them using the barcode module. If you need to do an inventory adjustment and update all of your quantities of inventory items, for example, you can go to inventory, and from here, this will let you start scanning items into your inventory just immediately. If you just scan the barcode on the product, it will add it to it. You can keep doing cycle counts and keep adding more and more quantity to it, and just scan all of your items. And then once it's done, you have 2 options. You can either manually hit the validate button, either by clicking it or using a touchscreen or something like that. Or if you want to do that with the barcode too, Odoo does allow you to have a list of common operations represented by barcodes themselves. So in other words, you can print out this page here, keep it laminated, keep it by your desk or something, and instead of pressing the validate button here, you can scan this validate barcode and it'll do the same thing. So in other words, you don't have to type anything, you don't have to interact with the screen at all if you want. You do everything with barcodes. We also have next to just move to the next item. You can do edit, main menu, cancel. All of the functions, all of the buttons are represented by barcode scan fields. So yeah, you can do your inventory that way. That's by just clicking inventory like I did. That does an inventory for your entire stock in your entire warehouse. But you can also, if you want to, from this page, if I just scan the barcode on a location, like we talked about earlier, every location can have its own barcode, then it'll take you specifically to the inventory location for that. So you could do it, say, 1 shelf at a time or 1 pallet at a time and do all of your inventory update operations that way. That's inventory adjustments. Incoming receipts, so purchase order receipts, you can do with barcodes completely as well. You'd go to your operations and then you'd find the receipt itself and just start scanning the operation, scanning the products in, validate it once you're done, and hit next with the scanning option to move to the next one, and just go through the different receipts that you're scanning. You could do it that way. I should also point out that for any of these receipt operations, you can also print out the picking operation slip. So if you want to use a combination of paper and barcode scanning, you could do that. You can have this form here, and this barcode right here represents the operation itself. It represents the receipt, and then every individual item you can have scan barcodes as well. So for example, instead of going into the and finding the specific receipt and clicking this and clicking on the receipts, if you're just from this main screen right here and you scan on a piece of paper and you scan this barcode, it will transport you immediately directly to that receipt form. And then from here, you can just start scanning the products and validate it that way. It's the exact same way for your receipts and for your internal transfers. You just go to the thing that you need to do. You scan the locations as needed, you scan the products, you scan the destination locations, and you validate it. It's pretty straightforward and it's pretty easy, and it can save you a lot of time. Finally, in terms of barcodes, if you're working with serial numbers or lot numbers, it's just an additional step, because basically every product barcode that you have, for example, if I look at all of my list of all of my different serial numbers that I have here, each individual serial number can also be represented by an automatically generated barcode. So it's just another step. First, you scan the overall product barcode, and then it'll ask you to scan the lot number or serial number barcode. As you can see, we allow for both levels of barcode scannability when it comes to these things. So that's barcodes. Great. So once again, to summarize what we've kind of covered today, we went over warehouses and location setup. We went over the products themselves and how to configure products, all of the different settings for the products. We talked about how you can adjust all of the quantities of items that you have in stock. So doing it one at a time by updating quantity, or doing it in mass by running a full inventory adjustment, or do a data import. We talked about all of the common warehouse operations, including your inbound receipts, your outbound deliveries, your internal transfers, drop shipments, and also talked about routing and routes. And then we discussed reordering rules and how they can be used to automatically generate draft purchase orders for you, or make to order triggers that trigger a purchase order only when you get a sale order for it. And then finally, we covered barcode functionality, which kind of does a pretty roundabout and full discussion of the whole inventory module. The only other thing I'd like to add before kind of turning it over to your questions, and I appreciate your patience because this is a long webinar, just a sort of bonus item, we always recommend these days, consider using Odoo Studio to fine-tune the inventory module the way you want. Now, of course, you need to have Studio, but Studio comes with Odoo Enterprise, and Studio is a module that you can add to Odoo Online. The possibilities are pretty vast. You could do quite a lot with it. One of the most common things that you might do with Odoo Studio if you have it installed is, for example, if you're not used to using internal reference, you don't call it that, you call it SKU. This is how it works. You just click Odoo Studio real quick. It changes the interface. You hover over internal reference. You can change the label to SKU. So you can really kind of fine tune it and customize it. As soon as I save that and hit refresh, it takes effect here on that product page, SKU, but also every other product now goes by SKU. It's a system-wide change without using any coding to really kind of fine tune it. And it also affects your filtering here. It's now going to be called SKU instead of item code, or instead of internal reference, and it affects your grouping and your reporting. That's a very basic example of Odoo Studio, but also it's not too uncommon to need special extra fields. So you can drag in a custom text field that will automatically be added to every product page. You can add additional tabs over here for relevant information. You can add other clickable smart buttons up at the top. And you can do, in addition to just text fields, you could do drop downs that reference whole lists of information. You can do checkboxes that are true, false, calendar fields, HTML to embed some special HTML code. It's a lot to it. We covered all just out of the box functionality, but with the combination of inventory the way it already is and how robust it is, and the possibilities with Odoo Studio, you should be able to basically get whatever functionality you want from inventory operations using Odoo. We're going to go ahead and end it there. But like I said, you can send us an email for follow-up or one-on-one questions about it, or just contact us to discuss it. And I look forward to it. Thanks for your time. We really appreciate it.